were at or above grade level proficiency. These are the highest scores West Ada School District has seen since the IRI was implemented 4 years ago. This ranks us 11th and 9th in the state amongst all public school districts, respectively, and first in all public school districts that have more than 2,000 students. So it's a huge celebration for our teachers. It's a huge celebration for our students. It's one of those indicators that we really look. We feel like being literate is a life skill for our students, something that will carry them on much beyond high school, and a critical skill that we teach. And so congratulations to our teachers, our students, our leaders throughout the district. The second thing I'd like to just highlight really quick, and she happens to be here, but our school nutrition feeding program is second to none, and they do a tremendous job getting our students, our families food, both breakfast and lunch. And so a huge celebration to the school nutrition staff who provide that service to our community. Not many people know that we continue to provide that service across our district in the summertime, but they do that, and they do a very good job with that, so thank you. And then last but not least, I'd like to just welcome Nick Smith. Nick kind of gets welcomed to the party by introducing 4 policies or 5 policies. He wasn't able to say no. We decided this last meeting, so congratulations. But he's going to be a huge asset to West Ada. He's already had some really valuable insights into student learning and just the way the district's run. And so we welcome his expertise and want to welcome to the West Ada family. So thank you.
All right, thank you. I did fail to excuse Trustee Buckland. He's unable to be here tonight. And at that, we will move forward with our patron input. We have one person scheduled to speak tonight, so we'll start with Mr. Zach Borman.
Thank you, Chairwoman Frazier, trustees, and Dr. Bubb. I appreciate your time. I'm Zach Borman. I'm the new president of the West Ada Education Association. And a couple things I wanted to talk about, primarily about 401.2, but I was honored and I'm grateful to the district for opening up the process, or for bringing it back to the committee again and allowing a number of different voices to provide input for this policy. I still think that it's a tough, the process as a whole went really, really well, much thanks to Brett Heller, who is just now replaced by Nick Smith. The process went well, and I think the second draft of the policy is much better as a result of that process itself. I still have a number of concerns about the policy, and I'd just like to offer those up tonight. First of all, as an organization, I think that any time that we limit what a teacher can be and how a teacher can choose to make connections with their students, or we encroach upon the autonomy, there's not a ton of autonomy to begin with as a teacher, but the more that we take away from them, the harder it is to do their job, and the less likely, the less opportunities or options that they have to make those all-important connections with a student. Because if you don't make some level of emotional connection with a student, they're not going to care about your content. And the more that we try to neutralize what a teacher is and can present to them, those students, to draw those connections between them, the less options we give a teacher. And I don't ever support that as a pure philosophical stance. Secondly, there's some ambiguity in there. While we allow sports banners, but we don't allow other sort of like cultural memorabilia and that sort of thing. So if you're really big into Marvel, or if you're really big into Star Trek, or whatever it is that you might happen to be, that kind of like shows a little bit of your personal side. Is it okay if and since I'm the only patron input, is it all right if I go?
You're fine, go ahead.
Okay,
you're fine.
Thank you. So the fact that there's any number of different things. Let's say cancer awareness or something. Let's say you survived breast cancer, or your parents survived breast cancer, or something like that, based off of where our policy is now. Any number of different like advocacy issues or issues that are personal to you are not currently allowable in that, unless we're going to just not really, unless we're going to look the other way, unless someone complains about it or something, allow anything that, you know. So that ambiguity and the limiting of what a teacher is. My probably my biggest concern, though, is because it's the students themselves that I think, while I understand that teachers are still going to be able to have the opportunity to, the district isn't going after what's on your person, right? So a teacher can express themselves on their person and the way that they dress and whatever. But I think on the district, this is hold on, I wrote this down because I wanted to get this right. Understand that this does not preclude teachers from being able to communicate to kids their support, as it does not attempt to control what is on the teacher's person. What it does, however, is leave behind a resounding silence on the part of the district in terms of the level of support of many of our students. The silence is marked in that the district should understand the particular risk that these students present. And while the district can't be expected to take every single step that is necessary to help out our most at-risk demographics, it can be expected to make reasonable ones, or at the very least not impede attempts to do so, or to help. And by that I just mean like neutrality for some of these kids that have never, this certain demographics that fall under this, that the kind of flags that can't be shown and that sort of thing, which are not really political but human in nature and accepting in nature, are not going to be allowed into what's normal. Sports teams are normal, they're fine. Other flags are not normal and are not fine and therefore excluded. And I think that the evidence shows that schools and districts that are supportive and inclusive of these demographics have better end results with mental health and overall like happiness of these kinds of students and stuff like that. And so I just worry that taking this, not allowing for those and not allowing teachers to express in that kind of a public way that as supported by the district, that that it excludes from the normal and is potentially is not as beneficial to those kids, those communities as we could be as a district. So I thank you for your time, and yeah.
Thank you very much. We do have time. Is there anyone that didn't get a chance to sign up that would like to comment this evening? Okay. All right, with that, we'll move forward into our discussion items for this evening. And our first is going to be our Chief Communications Officer, Greg Wilson. He's going to talk to us about Policy 401.2. This will be our second reading.
Chair Frazier, hopefully you can hear me. Trustees, Dr. Bubb. I'm here to present the second reading of District Policy Draft 401.2. A lot of work has been done between the first reading in late May and today. And before discussing this updated policy, it's important to thank two groups. I want to firstly thank the members of the working group who volunteered their time to revise and improve this draft policy. And I know Zach was a member of that, and I really appreciate his willingness to engage and continue to participate in this effort. I also want to thank those who have commented on the policy and provided valuable feedback these past several weeks. Like all good policy, this updated draft reflects the input and perspective of many different groups. So what is the district's goal in updating this policy? In addition to ensuring that the district's policies align with updates in Idaho law, it is important to ensure that the West Ada schools and classrooms be content-neutral environments. West Ada classrooms should be places that are conducive to positive learning experiences for all students. And follow-on speakers will address the necessity for updating this policy at a building level. There has been a lot of confusion about this policy, so let me provide an overview of the content of revised policy 401.2 for a second reading. There are three components. The first part affirms the district's intent that all staff follow the Idaho Dignity and Non-Discrimination in Public Education Act passed into Idaho law in 2021. The second part improves and expands on existing language around student surveys, which currently requires prior approval from administration. The revision of this section defines what student surveys are, updates the process for survey approval at a building level, and makes clear that the choice of student participation is left to the student and or family or guardian of that student, parent or guardian of that student. Ultimately, this updated policy makes clear, again, that West Ada student surveys must align with the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment in federal law and the Idaho Dignity and Non-Discrimination in Public Education Act in Idaho law. The final component focuses solely on the use of the district's physical property. Let me quote from the updated policy, quote, "School property shall not be used by personnel for the advancement of individual beliefs. It is the desire of the district that the physical environment of the district facilities be content neutral," end quote. The revised policy provides a list of flags and banners that are permitted to be displayed in classrooms, including those displays supporting instruction. And I think, as we heard earlier, based on feedback on this latest draft, there are still some updates that need to be made on this list to ensure that it is comprehensive. We alluded to sports earlier. I think there's some fixes that we can make to make sure that that list covers other areas that teachers may want to display. Let me also be clear that curriculum and the teaching of controversial issues are covered in other areas of district policy and are not before the board this evening. Finally, this policy does not limit any West Ada employee or student from exercising their lawfully recognized speech or association rights within the limits of a public school environment. This updated policy has been reviewed by the district's council in light of recent case law, and council participated on this working group and was the main drafter of this updated policy. The plan is to bring this policy back for a third reading at the August 8th board meeting. And with that, let me ask Carmi Scheller, followed by Kevin Leishman, and then Cliff Rice, all members of the working group that updated the second reading of the policy, to introduce themselves and to provide more information on the working group's process and the necessity of these policy updates.
Hi, Carmi Scheller, fifth grade teacher at Star next year, Star Elementary, and participant on the committee. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to describe the process of this policy review and where we are within that process. First, because I know there are many, many people outside of this room that do not understand this process at all, I gave a little overview of the entire process. All policy goes through a system of review and revision, hopefully on a regular basis. That systematic approach includes 3 readings. Each revision is on the board agenda for the meeting at which it will be read. This provides patrons, staff, and students the opportunity to submit comments publicly or in writing. The first reading is typically of the current policy with known revision ideas in a draft format. This reading occurs at a board meeting and is when the group working on the policy will receive feedback and questions will be given to by the board to the committee or individual, however it is. The board will have seen any written comments submitted prior to the meeting, and this interaction informs the revision for the second reading. Next, the draft is prepared for the second reading to the board, and the revised draft again receives feedback and input for what is typically the third and final reading. Depending on the feedback, minor edits or another revision will take place. Typically, the third reading is the final policy version. Board action is usually taken as an action item later in the meeting. At the first reading of Policy 401.2, there was much public comment, and it was clear that the first draft needed revision. The board asked questions and gave some input into the revision expectations for the second reading. Trustee Ozuna even considered making the second reading a new first reading. Brett Heller, the former deputy superintendent, and Amy White, district general counsel, began the process of reviewing public comments, researching topics questioned in the feedback, and seeking additional example policies. During this process, Mr. Heller formed a committee made up of administrators, counselors, and representatives from the West Ada Education Association. Each level, elementary, middle, and high school, had representatives from each of the invited groups. I attended representing the elementary level as a member of the association. The committee met June 15th at 8 a.m., planning to meet until noon and then set a follow-up date if needed. At the meeting, we introduced ourselves, established norms for this work, and then reviewed the current draft of the policy. There was a request for clarification on the intent and purpose of the policy revisions being drafted. This clarification provided content for some discussion on the broad areas of the policy. The committee engaged in incredibly open dialogue about various aspects of the policy. There was deep discussion of the topics of concern that were brought up in public comments with the variety of experiences and beliefs our community expressed. These discussions helped us form a shared understanding of the aims and challenges in developing all aspects of Policy 401.2. The revision process included a new draft based on the work Amy White and Brett Haller and the district administration had conducted in the time between the board meeting and the committee meeting. This revision addressed several of the main issues, giving the committee the opportunity to focus on the remaining areas of concern. Those items that were already covered in the Code of Ethics, current policy, and state codes were noted as such and removed from 401.2. The tone of the document was adjusted to provide guidance. The list of potential display items was discussed from a list borrowed from another district. This is an area that may have a need for additional input. One of the things I recognized in this work is the difficulty of considering topics from the multitude of perspectives of the community of West Ada. This committee respectfully engaged in challenging conversations to develop this draft being presented today. As I mentioned in my description of the process revision of that policy takes, this is the second reading. The third reading will be edited and revised based on the input of the community and the direction of the board tonight. The district and the school board will have the final say on the policy revisions. It's important to note that community and staff input is part of the process. A final draft might still have issues of concern. However, the more we're involved, the deeper our understanding and the better the policy.
Madam Chair, Trustees, Superintendent Dr. Bubb, Ms. Shepherd, I appreciate the opportunity to address you this evening, and I definitely appreciate the opportunity to have been involved in this process. Oftentimes, we at the building level are the ones, I guess I need to back up. I'm Kevin Leishman, principal at Sawtooth Middle School. At the building level, oftentimes we're the ones who are most heavily impacted by these types of policies. So I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be involved in the conversation. There were several different points of view that were shared and discussed, and I believe ultimately we came to the realization that there certainly is a need for this policy because of the legal obligation we have and what I believe is a moral obligation that we have to to not put undue influence on the captive audience that we have with our students on a daily basis. My experience has been that unfortunately there have been times where staff members who have pure intentions have displayed items that resulted in that pure intention was related to being inclusive and supportive, and ultimately it resulted in just the opposite of students feeling as though they were not included. So I believe it is an important policy to have. Just a couple things and then I will finish up. The other thing that I really appreciate about this policy is the consistency that it provides from building to building. And that consistency, I believe, also provides protection for our staff members because the guidance and direction by policy doesn't allow for individual decisions to be made. That's all I have. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman Frazier, trustees, Superintendent Dr. Bubb. My name is Cliff Rice, principal of Waihe High School. Thanks for having me here tonight. It was a pleasure being a part of the committee. I did, like Kevin did state, the intentions of the committee were awesome. A lot of different perspectives were shared. Passion definitely involved in that committee, which that's the right people that you want on that committee, people full of passion. A couple of things that I would just wrap up to finalize maybe the conversation for now. I would also agree with Kevin. That policy is well needed. It does eliminate even our own leadership bias that sometimes sneaks in when we don't have a policy in place that we don't even recognize until that decision has been made. So that I believe this policy is very helpful that way. It's crystal, or it's clear. It helps give us some guidance that way. It also it protects our educators from accusations of bias. That's not their intention by any means, but there are some things that can be said and statements that are made, reputations that could be hurt because of the accusations that there's bias in that classroom, when in all good intentions, that is not accurate in many cases. And again, to just finalize that philosophy, and the goal of our district is to keep those classrooms neutral. And neutral does not mean boring. It does not mean basic. The passion of our educators, how they build rapport with our students. There's no banner, there's no flag that will replace the relationships that our educators have with students. And so that will, at least in my opinion, and at Waihe High School, that will continue to be the focus, is the relationships we build with kids, no matter what comes out of the policy. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, with that, we can answer questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your great comments, too. That was really helpful. I'll open it up to the board. Any questions or comments? Vice Chair Zuna.
Okay, I'll go first. I want to thank you for acknowledging that there might be some other things that we want to add to the list of approved items. I understand that with the, like sports flags, for example, it allows a teacher to show their personality, and it allows students that relate to that a way to relate to that teacher. But there's a lot of other students that don't relate to sports, or teachers that don't have that, right? So maybe it's inspirational quotes, maybe it's music related, I don't know what it is, but I think that we need to allow for that and give students a way to, I don't know, form those other types of connections with their teachers. I think that that's really important. Related to the survey, I just had one suggestion. In paragraph 3 here, I think that it might be helpful, paragraph 3 under the student surveys, if we can move that to the first paragraph. This is where it talks about that we may have a list of pre-approved questions. Because then you might see that there is a way to submit your survey without having to get approval. I think it would read a little bit more clearly. The last thing that I want to talk about, and I hope this is okay to discuss, but by far the biggest concern that I've heard about this policy relates to some of our at-risk students. And I don't have a good answer, but I thought maybe we could have the conversation about, and I'm just going to ask it just really straightforward, but if we were to allow a pride flag in a classroom, let's say, does that legally open us up to having to allow other types of flags that we wouldn't want displayed? Is there a legal obligation with that? Or is it really just in creating neutrality? And to follow up, if we don't allow that, and I'm using this one example, but I mean, it could be lots of our at-risk students, but how do we make sure that those students know that they're supported, and what other things do we have out there to give that support to those students?
So, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Ozuna, let me just say two things, and then I'm going to hand it over to Cliff to kind of speak to recognizing at-risk students and establishing those relationships, and some of the concerns that Zach brought up, and I think others that have brought up that are very passionate about this issue. First, yes, we're going to review the list of acceptable displays in light of other cultural, items that we may want to include. So I think that that's very important. And then I know Amy White is listening, and I know she's making notes in terms of that update to that section on surveys. So I'll make sure she gets that. And then with that, I just wanted to turn it over to Cliff Rice. Being a professional educator, I always think it's important to kind of defer to them in talking about how you address students that
Yeah, great question. Thanks for putting me up here. Appreciate that, Greg. I appreciate the question. It really, an opportunity exists in our clubs. That's an awesome opportunity for our students to organize clubs, our staff members be a part of that. Our students know when clubs, whether it's, it doesn't matter the club, whatever it is that they relate to, that opportunity exists after school hours as well, if that makes sense. Trustee Ozuna, if that's a part of what you're asking.
It is. Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Absolutely.
So with let's just say a club for an at-risk population, I'm assuming that teachers can belong to that club, right? And there could be a list of teachers that belong to that club, whether they actively participate or not, that could be made available for all students to easily access?
Correct. And I think it's common practice, yes, that our schools will display on their webpage all the clubs and organizations that the school offers and those teachers, staff members that are involved with those clubs and organizations. Regular announcements of when they meet, opportunities to gather and build relationships and rapport through those that have like-minded interests that way.
Okay, thanks. I struggle a little bit with this when I want to provide support for those students, and I'm also well aware that there are families that don't support that, right? And so it puts that in conflict, and I understand where we're trying to go with neutrality, but I want to make sure that students that are at risk have a place where they can go and get support.
I would
It's really
also
important
add,
to me.
yeah, absolutely. I'd also add that our counselors do a fantastic job of providing small group opportunities with students that are at risk, no matter what, whether it's anxiety, you name it. There's a ton of at-risk population that have different struggles, and those counselors do a fantastic job building rapport, finding out who those are, and then bringing them in for a small group.
Dr. Bubb.
Madam Chair, trustees, I think Cliff brings up a good point, or Mr. Rice brings up a good point, and I want to just consider this for a second. When we talk about support of students that are at risk, and we put around a symbol that's in the classroom, that's a really slippery slope. And I think we've talked about slippery slopes a little bit, but we have a lot of at-risk groups. And defining what those at-risk groups are, there's a lot of at-risk groups that are out there that we don't have symbols in any classrooms. But what we do is we count on our teachers, we count on our professionals in the buildings, we count on our school leaders to develop relationships with our kids, to find out what their needs are while they're on our campus and how we can support them and make sure that they're learning at the highest levels in our schools. And so I think we do a tremendous job with that. This provides some guidance with that, but I don't want it to get lost in this idea that if I have this in my classroom, it allows me to show a different level of support, because we support a lot of our at-risk populations, regardless of what they are, by building relationships. And I firmly believe that our relationships are what get our kids through and let them learn at high levels.
Any other questions? Okay. Trustee Benetti?
So I think, Greg, you talked about this, but and it may be for others, so I'll let somebody help me out. At risk of what?
You want to?
Dr. Bubb?
Madam Chair, trustees, I mean, we use this at-risk term in education. At risk of not graduating from high school, at risk of mental health problems, at risk, I mean, it depends on who the student is, right? At risk of not being a successful, what we define as successful contributor to the community at a future date. I mean, I think there's a lot of at risk. At risk is, I will say, students that we consider at risk are students that we know have some predetermined challenges ahead of them, if that's an easy definition of it. But we use at risk as kind of that catch-all term to be able to identify students that have some challenges that are ahead of them that we know we're going to try to support through.
Madam Chair, follow-up. So is it reasonable for me to then assume that if the at-risk component is that at risk of not graduating, at risk of not achieving at the level that we seek to, that the the addition of a flag or not a flag is not material to whether or not that student is going to graduate. Is that effectively what we're saying? Or is that flag like marginally critical to that population achieving graduation?
I mean, we're answering a hypothetical, but I'd say yes. And
Okay.
again, this policy is, I know it's, again, with that first reading, there was a very broad discussion about what this policy was and wasn't. It is rather narrow, and what we're talking about is district property is what we're talking about, and displays on district property, and ensuring those are content neutral.
Right, thank you. And I did put a hypothetical to you, but I'm just trying to frame it from the perspective of, okay, if I have to make a decision based on the trade-off of whether or not this is going to contribute to somebody graduating or not graduating, that helps me sort of frame the importance of that particular issue relevant to that particular goal, if it's this category of at-risk that the one that we are the most tremendously concerned about, right? So thank you, that's very helpful. I have a follow-up if that's possible. So I tend to be very reluctant to have lists of things that are approved because they bog down, particularly in policy, and you're having discussions on individual items. There'll always be counterexamples. What about this? What about that? We've already seen that in the comments already. Did the committee, and by the way, let me take a step back and say, wow, great job on the committee and bringing everybody together and expanding the communication. That is such a step in the right direction. That's awesome. That said, did the committee consider any alternative approaches that were beyond just a prospective list of things that will be approved, such as ombudsman or review process or things, or was that considered and said, you know, it's going to cause more strife than necessarily we want to have a more narrowly defined, and this is what we came up with the policy?
I'll answer that question pretty tight. So I think the list itself are the most common things you will see. And I think that that's a good approach from the standpoint of someone can look very quickly and see, okay, that's something I'm going to see in the classroom. I think what we've discussed doing is maybe having something where there is a building principal approval. That might be something we add on. That's a little more expansive. But I think ultimately we just need to look at this list one more time and make sure it's comprehensive enough and it addresses some of the scenarios that we've been talking about.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? No? All right, well, thank you so much. This was helpful. All right, and with that, I know we have a few guests tonight that I think were here primarily for 401.2. We thank you so much and want to let you know that if you feel like you have other things to tend to tonight, we're not voting on 401.2. There won't be other discussion of it. So if you have other things you need to do, feel free to excuse yourself. All right, next on our list is our attendance policy 500.1, and this will be a first reading by our Deputy Superintendent, Nick Smith. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair and trustees. Just wanted to thank you again for this opportunity to work for the West Ada School District and serve the families of the West Ada School District. I'm humbled and very excited to be here. So maybe less excited to present policies to you tonight, but I get to present 5 policies to you, the first being those attendance policies. So we'll jump right in. So the first 2 policies, 500.1 and 500.2 are the 2 attendance policies, and I'm going to kind of talk about them in tandem because they're really, the changes are together. But the revisions of these 2 policies came out of the regional director's efforts to clean up and align the student handbooks, which are also on the consent agenda tonight. And during that process, they identified some basic gaps between the 2 policies. We have a secondary attendance policy and elementary attendance policy, and they weren't necessarily aligned. So a lot of the revisions that you see are just simply trying to bring those 2 policies into alignment, but I'm going to identify a few of the more significant changes. In policy 500.1, under the extended family education trip, they've added a provision for completing work upon return for work that cannot be prearranged, so assignments that maybe weren't assigned before the trip took place, a way to get those completed. They've also eliminated the requirement for students to submit a 1-page paper when out for an extended family educational trip. It was determined that this provision wasn't being implemented consistently across the district and maybe has has run its course and was a little bit outdated. Under the excessive absences, the language was revised to reference 15 unverified absences may result in a student being unenrolled from the school. This change brings the policy better in alignment with what school practice is, and especially in our current times of COVID, where there were many absences oftentimes, right? And then the section for makeup work and truancy was added to bring the secondary policy in alignment with the elementary policy. And then under the habitual truancy, the language was revised to state that any student who is deemed habitually truant will be referred to prosecuting attorney pursuant to Idaho Code 33206. And the language that was taken out of that is taken out because that was directly out of the statute. So they've instead referenced the statute rather than quoting the statute. And again, that also is been revised. They removed the 10 absence piece to bring the policy better in alignment with our practices. So that's basically the revisions to 500.1. Would you like to jump into point 2 as well? In point 2, the language on the first page was revised to match the language from the secondary attendance policy. So you see a big section that was deleted and a big section that was added. Again, that was part of that, trying to bring the policies in alignment. You see the same changes under the extended family education trip. You see the same changes that we talked about in 500.1. Same with the excessive absences, the 15 unverified. The definition of excessive tardies was removed. This is something that's a little bit different to align with the secondary attendance policy and to match practice in our schools. And again, just like the secondary one, they addressed that habitual truancy piece as well. Are there any questions regarding 500.1 or point 2?
All right, any questions or comments? Vice Chair Zuna?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few. And I want to apologize because typically I would just probably send this to you in email because some of it's just cleanup of language, and I just didn't have a chance to get that accomplished. So again, I apologize for that. On both of the policies, there's still some reference to Joint District Number 2 that I think we need to change to West Ada. So if we can catch those because we're cleaning it up, I think that'd be helpful. And then I'm not sure if this is in both of them or not, but under the code for illness, it refers to the old policy numbers, and we've changed the policy now to 500.1, 500.2, so we just need to update it under illness. I can send these to you in email also later if that's helpful. Yeah. One thing that I think would be helpful in this policy, where it talks about, there's a paragraph in here that talks about how only 3 absences are allowed on the high school, middle school policy. Or maybe it was 6 on the middle. Anyway, where it talks about the number of absences allowed, I think that it might be helpful if we could put in there what type of absences we're talking about so that you don't have to go to the codes to see what counts toward those absences and which ones don't. Great. I think it'd be really useful for parents to be able to see it that way. One of the things that I wanted to acknowledge and give you some appreciation for is a few years ago, if a parent called their child out sick, they needed a doctor's note for that to not count against this. And I mean, there were a lot of excessive trips probably to doctors and stuff to get that cleared, and that was changed, I think, for COVID actually, but I appreciate that you didn't go back there because I do think that that's probably better for families and our healthcare workers as well. So thank you for not rolling that back. The last thing on the high school policy, there's a section in here related to functions, and it says if you are out, you can't participate in an event or practice or whatever that is. I thought maybe we could take a look at that and perhaps make it similar to what we have in the middle school section, because it's not clear if can you have a doctor's appointment and still participate. I think the intention would be yes, but it's not very clear on whether or not it's a full day or partial day. Great. And then the only other thing, can I have one more? Thank you. Related to the elementary one, do we need to make any changes with the all-day kindergarten and the way, the hours that are there related to all-day kindergarten? And I'll just leave that as a question, and if we do, we can look at it later.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Trustee?
So Trustee Ozuna nailed a lot of the things that I had about sort of that sort of cleanup, but I wanted to up-level it a little bit. The elementary attendance codes, not all of those codes are referred to within the actual remainder of the document. And this is sort of nitpicky, but I like these things to be much more slimmed down when possible, just because when you're particularly affecting policy, you want it to be as tight as possible. And I really don't like it when things that strike me as operational start to get into the policy, right? Because operational, you guys should just do whatever you want operationally, and the policy should just enable it to happen. At least that's my opinion. So it would be at least useful from my perspective to give the right impression to make this more definitional. Right? Like, this is how we define an illness. This is how we define a unverified. This is how we define those things. And if we're not using them in the actual policy, then we strip them. I know that's a little bit of work on your part, and if it's too much trouble, that's fine. But that, I think, would be that would strike me as a little bit more policy and definitionally oriented, as opposed to operationally, these are codes that we use, because those are not a concern as a board, frankly. You use whatever codes you want. But it would be useful for us and for everyone to read the policy to be able to actually say, oh, and that's what this means. And I think that in particular, using that sort of tight definition, I think will also touch upon what Trustee Ozuna said, where it's like you refer to a word in another location, but it's not exactly clear what it is. If you have a sort of definitional context, then that would actually be really useful. It'll tighten it up, it'll shorten it, it'll make it clearer, and if that works for you, that would be great.
Yeah. Chair Frazier and trustees, I appreciate the feedback on that. For the second reading, we'll take that back and see what we can do. Yeah.
All right, and now you get to go with accreditation policy 602.7.
This one might be simpler. As you can see in the accreditation policy, really what we're dealing with here is a technical change. The state basically has selected the accrediting body that accredits schools in the state of Idaho, K-12 schools in the state of Idaho. That entity that accredits schools has merged with another company, and they have become Cognia. So this is just basically updating the accrediting agency to the new name. So, any questions on that one?
Any comments or questions? All right. Trustee Benetti.
I'm sorry. Does the actual specific company name, is it required by statute? Does it have to be in our policy?
Chair Frazier and Trustee Benetti, that's a great question, and we actually had that discussion as to whether we should put the name into the policy or not. One of the suggestions was that we just simply use language that the accrediting organization approved by the State Board of Education. That was an alternative. The conversation was basically that there are other accrediting organizations out there, there are other accrediting bodies, and it has created some challenges for district administration in the past, and having the actual name has helped to alleviate some of those challenges.
Say no more, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Any other comments or questions? All right, and your last one, sir. High school diploma and graduation ceremony policy 603.21, first reading.
I actually have two more.
You have two more? Okay, I have one more in front of me, so there you go.
Oh, sorry.
All right.
So 603.2 is the high school credits and graduation requirements. And that one is a pretty long policy. Let's see here. One of the, basically, I'm just going to start at the top and work down, but one of the first edits that you're going to see, obviously, is just a change to the name, high school credits and graduation requirements, trying to be more specific about what the content is. The next change that you're going to see there is related to middle school students being able to earn high school credits while still in middle school. Those edits simply bring the policy in alignment with what is in administrative rule, so state board administrative rule. And so nothing too controversial there. The next substantive changes relate to homeschool or non-regionally accredited public-private parochial freshman competency credits. And that basically is aligning the types of credits we will accept from a non-accredited institution or a homeschool situation, what kind of credits we will accept, and aligning it to our curriculum that's been approved by the board. So making sure, you know, if we're granting credits, we're granting credits for what our kids would have taken in West Ada School District. The next big change there, and a more substantive change, is related to the extended learning opportunities. So the state legislature passed a law. It's state statute 336401, Idaho Code, basically allows students to earn credits through extended learning opportunities. So outside of our school setting, how does a student go about earning credit for activities and things that they have done outside of that school setting? And so this is putting into place kind of what qualifies for an extended learning opportunity, what qualifies for credit under an extended learning opportunity, and what's the process that an individual would go through to have something qualify. And so we've outlined that language there. We've basically taken the language directly from the statute, but we have added some provisions about how they go about getting approval for that credit to count. The next substantive change on page 3 pertains to students withdrawing from school. The proposed language is designed to streamline the withdrawal process for our registrars and outlines that the student's current grade at the time of withdrawal will be recorded in the system along with a W. The reason this is important is if you think back to COVID times, we might have had students who dropped out. Their grade would have been recorded as a W in the system, but they might have re-enrolled in another school or in the same school within a week or two, and we had lost their grades basically because we recorded it as a W on their exit, and now we would record it as a B and a W. If they had a B in the class when they left, it'd be a B and a W, and so if they re-enrolled in the system, we would have that information. And so it's basically taking a multiple processes for withdrawing and kind of combining them all and streamlining them. So the next substantive change, under the section on retaking courses, a provision has been added that clarifies that if a student passes a course but wants to retake it to get a better grade, they can count that repeated course as an elective credit if they're short of the elective credits for graduation purposes. And then you're going to see a large section of text that has been deleted. That large section basically is being removed because they are addressing graduation requirements for students that have since graduated. It's no longer relevant to students that are enrolled. And then, I promise we don't have to go page by page, but there's just a couple more things. The next change on page 5, you'll see edits related to students taking math in their senior year. The State Board of Education has repealed the requirement for students to take math in their senior year. You guys maybe have talked about that in the past. At this time, the West Ada School District is going to keep that requirement in place, but we've put in here the language about what opts a student out of that. And so we've made that change. And then, let's see. You're also going to see on page 7 some language related to the civics test. That was revised. This is simply aligning the language to the other civics test language elsewhere in the policy. There were references to the civics test requirement, and it was worded differently in each section. So just trying to bring some alignment there. And then the rest of the, there's also on page 7, you'll see that we've added graduation requirements for virtual schoolhouse. And then the rest of the edits that you see in this document are repeat of those that we've already covered for different programs. So basically repeating what we've covered for Centennial High School Newcomers Program, or repeating what we've covered for Renaissance High School or Idaho Fine Arts. So it's a repeat of the same edits. Any questions on this document?
Any questions or comments? Vice Chair Zuna?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that this policy is really long, and it is, and I think it's because of all of our unique high school situations, right? And we spell it out for all of them. would there be any advantage in putting together a grid that, lists the schools or lists the classes, lists the schools with just a requirement of what's there? And it might also simplify things for parents that are looking at a transfer from one school to another and how things align. Something to consider.
Yeah. Chair
Thank you.
Frazier and Trustee Ozuna, I agree. If something like that doesn't exist, which I'm learning there's lots of things that exist that I don't know about yet, but if something like that doesn't exist, I agree that would be a really beneficial thing to our patrons. Yeah.
Any other comments? Trustee Benetti?
So is this policy as written required by statute, required by the state board? Okay.
Chair Frazier and Trustee Benetti, so a lot of what's in here as far as the graduation requirements are articulated in administrative rule. So the administrative rule approved by the State Board of Education outlines the minimum high school graduation requirements that a student has to complete to graduate in the state of Idaho. They are minimums, and districts can establish graduation requirements above and beyond those. So what we have here before you does go above and beyond what the state requires and articulates what the West Ada School District expects of a graduate before we're able to grant that diploma.
And so the reason I'm asking the question is that has to then be done on a school-by-school basis according to the I mean, is it apocryphal or is it,
Yeah.
what's the?
Chair Frazier and Trustee Benetti, so the reason that you see it school by school in this case is because we have some different, the graduation requirements that are going above and beyond what the state requires are different for some of our different schools. So when you look at Idaho Fine Arts or Renaissance or the Centennial program, they have a little bit different graduation requirements than a Oahe High School or Rocky or Eagle or Centennial. And so that's why you see those different versions for all these different entities, and it makes it a longer. If you, in other districts where you don't have special programs and things of that nature, you would probably just see the one section listing, here's our graduation requirements for the West Ada School District. But because of those special programs that have unique classes that are required to get an IB certificate or something of that nature, that's why you have those delineated differences.
And because of graduation requirements, they are required to be policy.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Chair Frazier and Trustee Benetti, yes, the board needs to approve those graduation requirements. It is a requirement in state board that if you have additional graduation requirements or graduation requirements that exceed what the state requires, that the board make those decisions.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I feel like I just said this. Now for the last one. I like to test everybody, make sure we're all paying attention.
That's perfect. The last policy before you today for a first reading is the high school diploma and graduation ceremony policy. The proposed revisions contain some technical edits, as you'll see, but the more significant edits relate to adding the virtual schoolhouse to the section pertaining to which high school grants a diploma when a student has dropped out of one of our other high schools. And so you'll see there, like Rebound, if a student drops out of one of our traditional high schools and enrolls in virtual schoolhouse, their diploma would come from the virtual schoolhouse. It wouldn't come from the high school that they had withdrawn from. So that's one of the changes. Another substantive change in this policy pertains to wearing stoles during graduation. Under the proposed revision, students who have enlisted in a branch of the United States military are authorized to wear associated stoles or pins during the graduation ceremony. And in the past, National Honor Society students were allowed to wear cords, and students earning an associate degree or who had met the requirements of the full International Baccalaureate program were allowed to wear stoles. So this adds to that list of individuals that can wear stoles for those that are joining the armed forces. Additionally, the proposed language would allow students who qualify to receive honor cords after the first Monday in May to receive honor cords as available. However, due to printing timelines, this would not be reflected in the pre-printed graduation program due to the lead time necessary to get the programs printed. But they still do get those cords, they get to wear them in the ceremony. The last proposed change in this policy related to graduation speeches and articulates that the graduation speeches will be reviewed by school administration. I'm sure they already are, but reviewed by school administration and must be relevant to graduation and without profane or slanderous remarks. Are there any questions regarding this policy?
Vice Chair Zuna?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think these changes are really good, and I also want to thank you for continuing to support our early graduates and their ability to walk. Thank you for leaving that in.
My pleasure.
Any other comments? Okay, I'm really happy that you've got the piece on our military and making sure that can be honored. I have a lot of members of the military, my dad, everybody, big Navy people. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And with that, thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to presenting to you for many years to come.
All right, we'll try and give you as many opportunities as possible. I'm sure they'll be happy to, yes, to hand that over. All right, for our last, this evening we'll be hearing on our school nutrition rates, and that will be by Shannon McCarthy-Beasley, our school nutrition supervisor.
So today's our summer kickoff. So from now until July 29th, we are feeding meals Monday through Friday, except for 4th of July, to all of the students 1 through 18 across Meridian. So if you have a child between 1 and 18, please find yourself at Tully Park, Chateau Park, Meridian High School, Desert Sage. We want to feed your child lunch.
Oh, it's amazing. It helps not only give my kids a nutritious lunch, but also socialization with all their friends that they're missing at school.
It's fantastic. It's, like I said, it's so rewarding. It's so fantastic, especially since we had 2 years prior to this year from COVID that we were not able to gather like this with our kiddos. So to me, this is just, I have a passion for this program, so it makes my heart very happy.
There, almost ready. Here we go, here we go. You got a avocado on your face. Hey, you want a tattoo?
What kind of tattoo did you get?
Avocado.
Why did you get an avocado tattoo?
I like avocado.
It is very nice. Let the kids go play at the park, they get lunch, get all their energy out. It's great.
You get Roaring Springs! Oh my gosh, that's Roaring Springs!
Mark it off.
This is amazing. I want to see more. Double it. Everybody come out. I want to see everybody here. I want every child that's enrolled at West Ada, that has a brother or sister at West Ada, that has a sibling that went to West Ada. I want everybody here. I want all of Meridian in Tully Park, in Chateau Park, at Meridian High, at Desert Sage this summer. Hi, I'm Shannon McCarthy-Beasley, your school nutrition supervisor. Madam Chairs, trustees, Superintendent Dr. Bubb, thank you so much for having me here tonight to speak on the great year we've had and talk about changes and challenges that we're about to face in the school year 22-23. First, I'd like to start off by saying, oops, excuse me. I oversee a staff of about 250 people. We have from our food techs to our food service managers to my amazing procurement team and my area supervisors. Together, we came together this year and fed 25,000 students on average a day in West Ada. So we were feeding some hungry students, and we did it with smiles, and we did it amongst all of the challenges that came our way. With that being said, pre-pandemic, operating under eligibility status, we were serving about 18,000 kids per day. So feeding students for free was very beneficial for us. As most of you know, or are going to come to know, our universal feeding waivers that were given to us during pandemic are coming and have come to an end on June 30th. So effective 22-23 school year, we will go back to eligibility status. Families will have to fill out a free and reduced application, and from that application, they will either qualify for a free meal, a reduced priced meal, or go to a paid meal. I'm here today to discuss those paid price meals with you. As you can see here, we have some changes and some rates for not only our area districts around us, but what our rates used to be and what we potentially need them to move to. We are faced with numerous challenges coming from the supply chain. Not only am I looking at a 7.5 CPI rate increase, my manufacturing increases are going anywhere from 20 to 25%. And that was my July increase. I'm looking at another increase in January. So our increases for our food and our supplies have tripled in price from what they were pre-pandemic to what they were at the beginning of the year last year. Not to mention our amazing wages that we increased our staff this year, which were very much so deserved, so thank you for that. I don't feel that these prices are unreachable for our families. We still want our families to be able to take access of our meals. We still want our families to have their students come through our meals. That's our business, right? I want to feed 40,000 students a day. I would sleep easy at night if I fed 40,000 students a day, because I would know every student in West Ada received a meal from us. We don't want to increase our prices too much for our families not to be able to have their students reach them, as well as keep us in the positive. We do have a positive fund balance right now that going into next year we will tap into with our prices and with what our costs have become. Other factors that are coming into is what our peers are doing and what our, I don't want to say competitors, but what's making it fairly easy for families in other districts to also feed their students. As stated, we do want to reduce the impact on our families as much as possible. The other thing I'm proposing is our a la carte pricing. Currently, under the pandemic, we haven't been offering a la carte to our families or to our students. These give students the opportunity that maybe don't buy school lunch, that would like to purchase something in the cafeteria that is Smart Snack compliant, that is something that's nutritious for them to purchase. So these are where those prices come in. Sometimes we have a high school boy that wants, you know, an extra chicken sandwich at lunch, and this would give him that opportunity to purchase that extra lunch meal or lunch entree for himself. At this time, the other changes that we foresee coming is going back to free and reduced applications, having a marketing plan for that to try and have as many of our families have quick access to these applications. We've moved to a new program called Titan, which is extremely user-friendly. You can access it from your phone. You can download an app. So we plan to have a full marketing rollout at the beginning of the school year, so as many families know to fill out this free and reduced application to try and retain as many of our students to be free and reduced. Thank you for your time. Questions?
All right, any questions or comments? Trustee Benetti.
Thank you so much. The pride that you have is, it's just beaming through. So I know that we're going to talk about this again in the board meeting in August. Is that when we should talk about numbers? Or, because I know Jonathan isn't here, and in his note, he said, no, I'm sorry. Let me be more specific. So, like you said, we're going to tap into the reserve. Is that a general fund item? Where does the subsidy come from? What is the subsidy per meal? And if these questions are better for Jonathan, I'm happy to wait. But if you have them handy, that would be great.
So currently we don't know what our reimbursement rate is going to be. USDA has not come out with that yet. The waiver that was passed, or the, I guess, extension that was passed, was a higher reimbursement rate on lunch being 40 cents and on breakfast being an additional 15 cents. What the baseline is, we don't know yet. The fund balance we'll tap into is our own, is school nutrition's fund balance. We have a very positive fund balance.
Okay, great. And will we know by the August meeting? Do you know that? We should? We're hoping? Okay, that's enough for me. Thank you.
Vice Chair Zuna?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you happen to know, are the federal requirements going up? And is it going to be easier for families to qualify for free and reduced lunches?
I don't know that answer at this time, I'll be honest with you. They've given us our eligibility guidelines, but those could possibly change. Pre-pandemic, West Ada operated at about 24% free and reduced. Going forward into next year, I believe will probably be about 20%, if not lower, in free and reduced, based off of just our community eligibility, our direct certifications. Even those have dropped in our area. We do currently have 3 CEP sites that will continue into 22-23, Meridian Elementary, Frontier Elementary, McMillan Elementary. Those 3 sites will continue to feed their students for free breakfast and lunch based off direct certification, but our direct certification district-wise is about 8%.
Okay, thank you. And thank you in advance for working with those families to try and get them to fill out those forms. I had one last question that I have forgotten, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? Dr. Bubb?
I just want to take a minute to thank our entire school nutrition staff. Our kids don't learn if they're hungry. And what you guys, the service you guys provide, Ken, you did an amazing job. really encapsulating what a kid feels when they get those lunches. It is a critical part of what we get, what we provide our students every single day. I don't know that our food nutrition services people always believe, oh my gosh, I'm making a difference every single day, but they absolutely do. So thank you to you for your passion. I think it was already mentioned, but thank you to you for your passion and your entire team. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. They work hard.
Vice Chair Zuna.
Thank you, Dr. Bob, and you sparked a memory in me. So my last question that I had for you, parents probably had money on their accounts prior to COVID and the free lunches. Is that still out there, and is that rolling over into
Yes,
whatever the system that'll be in place?
Yes, that
Okay.
is moved from one source into Titan. It is already there.
Okay,
so
perfect.
families will have ease of knowing that their money is safe and they can send their kids through the line.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I just want to say thank you for feeding my son the third lunch he gets every day. I send him with 2 sandwiches, my junior son, yes, and he's very excited on Orange Chicken Day. So thank you so much for the great food you do serve. That's great. All right, we have one action tonight that we need to address, and that is the accreditation policy 602.70. I will open this area up for any motions on that. Trustee Benetti.
I move that we accept the Assistant Superintendent Nick Smith's recommendation for policy 602.7.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Trustee Redford?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0 with Trustee Baclean not present. The next is our consent agenda, and I'll open it up for any motions on this. Trustee Redford?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second? Vice Chair Zuna?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0 with Trustee Baclean not present. And with that, we'll move to our work session, which I believe we're having in the other room, correct? All right. So we'll move into our work session.
you and adjourning, so I'm going to be very, very brief. But look, tonight I'm looking for some feedback. I'm going to provide kind of a high-level overview of the trajectory we're thinking for the communications policies, and then I'm looking for some feedback as we work through these. And before I do that, let me first kind of orient the board. Obviously, I think at least one board member, maybe 3 board members are aware there's been some work done on revising the existing communications policies. The reality is that they're antiquated. Policy 1000, which deals with community relations, was adopted in 1973. It may be the oldest policy on the books for West Ada, and it's limited in scope. I mean, it reflects a very small school district. Policy 403, or point 4, staff meeting interactions, again, was adopted when C.C. Andrews was governor of Idaho. It's not comprehensive or reflective of the new media environment, and it needs updates. And then finally, our newest policy, a young 13 years old, since its last revision, is policy 503.3, which deals with school publications. And I think that policy, I think, could be salvaged, but it could still incorporate new approaches. So I think the bottom line is, with a new communications team, we're going to hit the refresh button. I really just think that there's no reason to do a remodel when we can demolish and start from scratch. And so that's my plan, is let's just start from the beginning, really founded on West Ada's communications and team's vision and strategy for the next school year and beyond. And I think everyone's met Danielle. We've got a very new team, and so I think we want to implement new communications policies. So this is the timeline I'm envisioning, and it's very ambitious but doable. Obviously, we're having our work group right now where I'm going to generate feedback. And then through the rest of the month, I'm going to put together a policy committee, much like we saw with previous policies, and begin conducting outreach to really build a draft for a first reading in early August. I think that first draft is going to be, is the content correct? Are we hitting on the right points? And really kind of gauge your response for the policies and the direction that we're going. Again, if everything goes according to plan, we'll have a second reading at the end of August, a third reading in early September. And I think the most important thing is getting this out into the district, ultimately, as soon as possible. And really what we're envisioning is, the most important thing is putting together a communications handbook and conducting policy orientation and media training for staff. And the generation of this policy is kind of, it's a reason for doing that. It's a good excuse to get out in school buildings, start to do this training, get folks oriented on media use, and start really establishing relationships that are important to our communications vision, which I'll talk about. So the plan and vision, we're in the process of really developing the holistic plan, but the vision that I've been continuing to convey to staff in the district and others is that we want to professionalize our media and public relations for a large organization within a modern media environment. We need to speak with one voice, and the communication needs to go from the top bottom and the bottom to the top, and that's vitally important. Again, we need to engage diversity of constituencies, and we're doing a good job of that, but we need to continue to build on that, and our policies must reflect on that. And I continue to talk about building the West Ada brand. We need to leverage staff as ambassadors in the schools. And I think I want to credit Nikki for all the work she's done on social media and really establishing that brand, but I think there's a lot of runway that we can build with engaging staff and helping them be our communications ambassadors for a very large organization. And ultimately, these policies will implement that staff component of the strategic plan, and that's really what we envision with that, and that's really why we probably just need to start from scratch. So the guiding principles for these policies, simple to understand. I just, and again, that just requires editing, but I just really don't want these to get wonky. I want folks that maybe don't have communications experience or others to be able to understand these. consolidating communications policies into as few sections as possible. I don't want these updated policies to be kind of some of the challenges we have with other sections of West Ada policy. I want it to be as tight as possible, as consolidated as possible, and really making sure that there's a distinction between what should be policy and what should be procedure, and making that clear distinction. I think there's a lot of best practices and content from other large school districts and organizations that we can get from, and I intend on really casting a very wide net at that. And then finally, broad input from staff. And the reason why is because, again, it's very easy from the district level to generate policy and then send it on from on high and expect it to be followed. I think it's important, again, to kind of get that feedback and to make sure that what you're putting together actually makes sense to kind of the challenges that are being faced in the school. So this is the content that I really do envision, and I just have a few more slides. Okay, so these are some of the content areas that I really do envision for updated communications policies. I think we obviously need to refresh our communications and community relations vision for a large school district with a diversity of constituencies. We need to really make sure that these speak to our district's values. I think that's vitally important. I think just in my 2 months here at the district, I've seen some challenges with communicating critical information from school buildings out to parents. And I think we need to have templates and processes for doing this. Sometimes those communications go out and they're very consequential, and I'll get a phone call about it from a media source, and there's just a challenge there. And I think just making sure, again, that the communication is two-way, that we're providing assistance to the school buildings, and then the communications are coming back, so we're prepared and we're all speaking with one voice is vitally important. I've encountered this just in working with Dave Roberts. A lot of our building principals and others get media requests, and I just, again, want to make sure, I think responding to those and providing quotes is great. I just, again, want to make sure that that is structured and there's really a process there that, again, aligns with a large organization. School publications is an existing policy. Again, it's 13 years old, and I really think we just need to update that and probably make it more reader-friendly. I want our high school students that are in yearbook to actually read it and understand what it is. And then kind of the final context slide. Social media. Every large school district has some kind of social media policies. Whether those are district or school-operated accounts, just making sure that, how it's utilized. Is there a content manager designated in the buildings? What information or the process for posting information about students and how that works, those are all vitally important. With personal accounts, I think there's some questions about respecting district time and utilizing your social media on district time, protecting confidential information, for example. Also, just the rules around contacting students and others. So just really kind of honing in on best practices for both school-operated and personal social media accounts. Again, this will all provide an opportunity for social media best practices and really leveraging those ambassadors. I definitely think we need to have content around public records requests and data requests. Again, we want to be maximally transparent. We want to make sure we're speaking with one voice, and a lot of that information that's going out is done in very, very positive ways. And again, we're a complex organization. There should be very clear processes around that. And then finally, I've seen this in a lot of school districts, and again, this goes back to what we're doing a lot on social media, is just the good news submissions. And again, that might be more of a procedure kind of a thing, but I've seen a lot of school districts that have a very slick reporting process for getting information about what's happening out in the district up to key people like me, who then can go and talk to our friends in the media about the great things that are happening in our school buildings. And so really what I envision here are a set of policies that really align with what we're trying to do in the communication shop. And so I think with that, I'm willing to, I know it was a fight to download, but be willing to take any kind of with communications and some areas we might be missing?
Yeah, I would just start, Greg, I'll give a little bit of background on this. Greg and I were discussing this communication policy, and I think that the critical piece in this is that it is great going down the road that we think and want to make sure that we're touching on the things that we can do. Obviously, we can differentiate with what's policy and procedure, but are these the big ticket items that we want to get as we look at update there? What I don't want to do is spin wheels on things that are not necessary. We want to make sure that we're working on the good that we perceive to be policy that is out there.
And we can always build on this house too. I think that's important. But are these core
or tear it down, right? So
in this case,
right? Because I mean, so my perspective is like the assumption should be that we need to have more. So the first question I have is sort of alluded to this, but are you intending to consolidate all of those other communication plans into one section, and the rest will be removed?
I think that is my intent right now.
That's my
and to keep it really tight. I mean, I think we should, as much as policy can be consolidated. Again, I hope it doesn't be 20 pages, but that is my intent. Let's put it all in one policy. You can click on it on on wherever it is on the district website, and then there it is. And it's just, again, organization is everything when you're writing this kind of stuff. And I think you saw that when we were looking at some other policy updates. Is the organization really helps? So if we're organizing it in a way that intuitively kind of moves in ways that make sense to staff and others, then we've written good policy. That's a good resource.
So the only other feedback I would give on that direction is less is more, right? And if it's procedural, don't put it in policy.
I agree.
Right now, you have a secondary challenge, which is like you're still going to need to let people know what the procedure is, so operationally they know what's happening. Otherwise, you're just going to have ambiguities, and that's going to create a whole other back work. But then you can play where you need to play.
And I'll just say, and again, I was trying to be respectful of your time. Our intent is to, once we have the policy, isn't just to send out the policy. We want to create communications handbook, which will synthesize or summarize the key policy areas and then have those procedures and those best practices.
But those procedures should still be thought of in advance, right, so that they can align to the policy objectives that you're trying to accomplish, because you're going to need more decision, right? So they kind of have to happen at the same time. My point is that when you actually put it into and it can all be draft, or you can change it at will, right, because it's an operational administration you guys try to do, right? But the policy stuff, that's not as fungible, right? And that can only change that over so often, or has to be meetings and so forth. It should really, in my estimation, be minimum. And then the rest is your samples. Right? But as long as those procedures align with the goals that you're trying to accomplish, awesome. Respect.
Yeah, what he said.
I mean, is there any content that's missing, or is there anything kind of glaring? You're like, oh, I wish that was it. Social media is the most glaring one, obviously. That was trying to be remedied.
I think it's one of our best tools. I really think a lot of our parents are on that, because they're using it appropriately. Just that's where they are. That's where they're getting a lot of their information. And emails are nice, but talking with parents, being a parent, sometimes they can get missed. Sometimes they can be too long. And I think things going out in a social media format, whether that be Instagram, Facebook, whatever, I do think that could be utilized a lot better. I think it would be nice to see that.
But touching on that, is your intention for it to be symmetrical or asymmetrical? Right? I mean, are we going to be responding to comments and engaging in threads on social? Because I think that is a policy decision. And it should be, right?
Yeah, some of the social media policies I've talked about do kind of provide the guideposts for that kind of, engagement. So that's something that may be something that as I'm working through this, we may talk about.
I think the categories are sort of categorized, but I think that what you don't want to do is that you don't want to make a decision on a topic by topic basis. Right? This topic we're going to close for comment. This topic we're going to open for comment.
That's exactly right. And that's the real challenge. I think some people, and I've learned this lesson just in my government experiences, people don't like a comment, and so they'll delete it, and you're not allowed to delete it. But there are instances where you can delete a comment, like if it's vulgar or something, and that's something that, an engagement is a tricky proposition too. So I think that engagement's very positive, but again, without kind of policies and procedures, we don't have that structure that we need to make sure we're successful in that kind of work.
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking of it as an informational kind of tool. I mean, things that are posted on a district level, and you look at the district website, and what are there now? How many followers? A few thousand. over 12, which is great, but that definitely does not reflect the whole district. So I think if that can be transferred out to the individual schools and just reposted if there's a way. I mean, just those kind of simple things, but I do think that would be huge.
But the policy update, I mean, I'm looking at it as not just an opportunity to be a bureaucratic tool or to create a policy. It's more of, oh, now I get to have really positive conversations with school building people as I'm doing this job, as we enter a new school year. And again, we really want our school building leaders and our teachers to be kind of that positive environment of communications.
Well, and that's it, making sure communications.
That's what I'm really
how do we get the information out?
Well, and to your point, developing a system, the district puts something out, and then each of our schools also have followers of their social media. I think
that's the benefit of using Aptigee is that we do that, so our schools no longer have to. It's so that if I push something out, it goes to the app, it goes to the live feed, and I can select the schools. So for community eligibility provisions, I didn't select all of the schools. I selected McMillan, Joplin, and I think it was Frontier because they're getting free breakfast and lunch. The students at Prospects or Hunter don't necessarily need that information, but it's still relevant, so it's on the district page. So that's another benefit of transferring to the Aptigee system.
And I think the bottom line is, with the website, with our updated social media presence, with some of our key hires, we're already really modernizing our communication shop. It's now time for a refresh on the policies that then will allow us to have conversations again in the school buildings, and introduce ourselves and start building those relationships and trust that we need to be successful in communications in the district.
I think we need to think a little bit too about who's responsible to communicate what, because there is an overload of communication. And as people withdraw from our email distribution because there's just too much, where do they need to stay engaged to get information that is the most important?
So when I asked the board about what their thoughts are, because some of this relates to HR issues and protecting our staff. I know we have language in there right now that talks about talking to the media about what and having instructing staff explicitly in their speaking as a citizen, as an employee, how we do that relates to HR, and then really when you social media best practices, using your personal account, you're identifying yourself as an employee, what's that, and things that you post may have opportunities to visit about later. I mean, we want to, because we do have some things in the personnel portion on that, but I just want to make sure that I want to make sure they're lined up, but that is one of the areas in personal, like in model policies that deal with personal social media use, they address that kind of stuff. You know, what cap, what hat are you wearing? What is appropriate? What's maybe not appropriate? And I want to make sure, again, the worst thing, and I've seen this with lawmaking, for example, is writing something that doesn't correspond to what currently exists. That you want to make sure they parallel, that they align, that you're not writing unnecessary words, that everything. Right, and having this one needs to be, it's got to have that it's accessible when people find it, in the system and I don't know what the right answer is. If people are going to go to personnel to look for what the rules are, they're going to go to communications policy are, and how we link back and forth or have, simply searchable makes it better.
And maybe we reference, cross-reference, just all the same.
The other thing you could do is put in personnel and say, see
this
communications policy regarding.
He's so far away from that microphone.
Cross-referencing this.
Yeah.
Are we in a place where we can require some of the information that's going out to be
I wish all of this
easily
was
read
wired
on
for
mobile
this,
devices?
it's just not.
Like a school newsletter, for example,
If I turn
that's
it up
really
here, it's just
tough
going to
to
increase the garble, I'm
look
afraid.
at.
You're talking about ADA.
Yeah, so
The screen, yeah.
moving to Aptigee, we'll no longer use Blackboard, so they can send out alerts through Aptigee, and everything is mobile. So when they set it up, it's screen shared for a desktop, a laptop, and it's fit to size for your phone, regardless of if you're an Apple user or an Android user. So it automatically complies with both of those interfaces. And then we'll still have SMORE available. so that you can click that embed code for those newsletters, and it is user-friendly on your phone as well. So that's another benefit, or they can link it on their app. That each school site has an app, which is another way parents can, or even students can access it. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, I think
But part of that is training people at this point. We've trained a lot of schools, but we still have more training to do.
I also think what I'm hearing, just go back to Trustee Benetti's comment, is really just kind of, I might start with less is more. Rather than building kind of a gargantuan tree and then we're just going to carve it out, I may just start with something, here's kind of the core of what we want to do. Other stuff will be dealt with in procedure, and then we can build out from that, depending on where, I don't like, because for the person, one of the main editors, the other way is
Yeah, no, I think that's where you're going. I think, and can we actually go back to your vision strategy slide? So, is that it? Yes, thank you. So part of my concern with this vision, and I'll just give it to you as feedback, is that I think it's at cross purposes. The reason why is because, of course, communication is all about consistency, right? Your strategy is about differentiation, and then your tactics are about just consistency. And it's not obvious to me that you can do that by having all the staff with a diversity of constituencies and expect them all to stay aligned to the same message. That's not obvious to me. And it certainly it's going to be a relatively difficult challenge. So I know what you're trying to accomplish. I'm fully supportive of that. But I think that it's palpable to the sense that we want to have a vision that we know that everybody can align to. And strategically, it's simple to consume, and simple to be able to communicate. And the best strategies are the ones that are like they're just obvious. And sure, there's no subterfuge, there's no cutesiness about it. Like, we're a bigger army, we're going to go to the land war, or we're going to achieve it, right? Or we're faster than you, so we're going to be faster. But I mean, this is type of strategy, right? But I mean, really maintaining a consistency, because otherwise, if there is too many of that diversity of constituencies that are going to have, by definition, divergent views, if that vision isn't a really, truly consolidated and all-encompassing, the message is going to function, right? Particularly if you're allowing principals to engage in media requests, right? Which, like, I'd love to know the use case for that, because that's not an obvious use case for me. Well, I think they get media requests. The question is, how are we coordinating those? And I think ultimately, I'll just say this, we have to balance the fact that each school is kind of a unique culture and community on itself, and they know how to communicate. So, you want to talk about strategy and tactics. I do not want to micromanage the way people are communicating. There are some areas that require one voice and clear message and coordination, and there's other instances where the building principal knows how to communicate to their parents and knows how to get that message out. And all we're seeking is to know kind of what's going on and to maybe have a glance at something, or just to have some kind of collaboration on what that looks like. And that's what I've seen just in my 2 months. There's been a couple of communications that have went out. I deferred to the principal, but there was a couple of little kind of tweaks that you could make to really make sure it aligned with what I knew was the policy or whatever we were answering or they were trying to answer. And I think media requests are a good example of that. But that's different than talking to parents, right? You talk to parents, principals, like, bless you, I get that. Media requests are not as obvious. No, and I think that media requests are a really good example of that. Traditionally, I will say one of the things that Greg's done a good job of is engaging with our principals to make sure that when we get those media requests, our principals are reaching out to the chief communications officer to say, okay, how this is what I want to say, because oftentimes our principals want to say one thing, and this is how I'm going to say it. And Greg can grab it and say, that's not what you're communicating in that statement. So let's rewind. Let me help you craft that message, which is in alignment with the district's message. But when we say it, this is how we want to say it. And I saw the media training, which is really, really key.
This is about support. This isn't about like a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
Or like stricture. It's just about structure and flexibility. I mean, it is. It's a balancing act. In some instances, there's more structure. Other instances, more flexibility with coordination and collaboration.
Yeah. It's just that you get more leverage, you get more scale,
understand the intent, and then they can operate with the intent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think to go back with dealing specifically the schools is giving clear guidance to principals on what the first step they take after the class. Yeah. What happens in reality is there's all kinds of people. They're going to find the first person they get a hold of, right? And they don't want to get a hold of us necessarily. They want to get a hold of the school principal. Oh, yeah. And what happens historically is if it's an easy thing, they should move forward without having a consistent message going out. If it becomes a controversial topic or something maybe they don't want to speak to, then we get the phone call. And I think the policy needs a guy, the consistency. I don't care how innocuous a request may seem. You got to notify him and keep that consistent.
And I'll just use an example, not a very specific example, but there have been instances where communications got out. We didn't know about it in my short time here, and then it generated buzz on social media, and then I'm getting questions about it. I don't even know what they're talking about. And again, if I just knew about the communication, then I would be able to very quickly say, no, that's not what's happening. This is what's happening. It's really about providing kind of information for key people.
Is there a central repository where we store the communication? Here's where you go for all what everyone out in River Valley. Here's Heritage. Here's
well, with Blackboard, I mean, you could see a lot of the communication.
For a parent, though, you mean? No, I mean for district administration. But I get those calls. Can you go out to? Here's what. Right now, we're just here.
There's mass communications versus individual communication. Mass communications.
Like all that sent to parent communication.
So if it's a newsletter, all the administrators send them to me after they send them. Some send them on Wednesdays, some send them on Fridays, some send them weekly, bi-weekly. They always include them.
That's to be tough if you got asked if you didn't worry about it.
So the only other thing I'd say on social media is that I would definitely start with I would definitely start with just another communication channel on Adjournment. And it's not only because it's the easiest and it aligns with what you're trying to do, it's just another channel you're driving down. Until you get your feet set and the ground is set, like opening the floodgates on that is like, I mean, the potential advantages of it are huge, but it's dicey, risky, and can get off kilter really quickly. It's the best teamwork. We get it for a lot of work. Yeah, so I would just say, just view it as I don't know if you agree or disagree on that, because I know that social is big.
No, I mean, it would depend on how it's being done and what we're talking about. But there's a lot of communication that goes out by social media already.
Yeah. So,
We have protocols and guidelines for social media right now, but we don't have anything in policy that dictates them.
I don't think that needs to be in policy, though, does it?
I think the rules of the game, some of the stuff we're talking about, what's appropriate, how do you put student information, some of that stuff, I think that needs to be in policy, but then I think best practices and other student procedure. Awesome. So we're going in a good direction.
That's good.
Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thank you.
We're coming back, Chen.
Okay, I'll now open up for a motion to, or excuse me, first we'll talk about any future agenda items. Anything anyone needs added or talked about? Okay, now I will open it up for a motion to adjourn. Trustee Redford,
Motion to adjourn, please.
is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Have a lovely evening.